it's reasonable to conclude that there are instances where Israel has acted in ways that are not consistent with international humanitarian law.
There is no evidence that Israel is violating international law. All civilian casualties in Gaza are solely the responsibility of Hamas.
Give Israel the bombs they need to end the war they can't afford to lose.
I think the president is absolutely right to withhold these big bombs.
President Biden makes waves with his warning to Israel. The political fallout is well underway. More on that in a moment. But first, the star witness takes the stand. Former Trump personal attorney Mychael Cohen testifying this morning at the Manhattan hush money trial, a major moment in the former president's legal proceedings. Here to discuss that and more is Julia Manchester, national politics reporter with The Hill. Julia, my friend, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Michael, good to see you.
So let's start there in Manhattan with that hush money trial, a really major moment this morning with Mychael Cohen taking the stand. To start, Julia, walk us through why this was such an important moment. Mychael Cohen, Trump used to be such close allies. Then they had that very public break.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. This is someone who was once a very close ally to Donald Trump, someone who once said that he would literally take a bullet for his former boss, Trump. But then we saw in 2018, 2019, Mychael Cohen very much flip on Donald Trump, and the two have been very public enemies since then, trading a number of barbs in the press and the media and so on. So right now, this is, Mychael Cohen is also so important because he is literally the center figure at this hush money trial. He is the one who coordinated these payments or these alleged payments from Donald Trump to Stormy Daniels. So he is very much bearing all and telling what he knows took place or what he allegedly knows. Now, that being said, while the prosecution might think he is a key witness, there's also the argument in that he's one of the weaker witnesses or one of the weakest witnesses because of, his untrustworthiness in the past. He's someone who's very much flipped back and forth. And I think you're going to see Trump's team paint him as someone who is not reliable and really try to get that picture across for the jury.
Now, is this a make or break moment for the prosecution? Because we're not at the beginning of the trial, right? We've already heard from David Pecker. We've already heard from Stormy Daniels herself. But there's been so much said and so much anticipation ahead of the Mychael Cohen testimony. Looking at the political ramifications for this case, this may be one that folks say is the weakest of the four indictments against the former president. But this may be the only one where we actually see a verdict before the November election. So is this a make or break moment for the prosecution?
I do think it is a make or break moment for those, reasons that you just laid out. Look, this is seen as the weakest of the cases. And I think part of the reason why it's seen as a weak case is because Mychael Cohen is someone who is unreliable. Just think about this. I mean, we've seen that the judge issued this gag order against Donald Trump, telling him not to talk about the witnesses or the trial publicly as much as he can. Whereas Cohen has also gotten a bit of a slap on the wrist by Judge Juan Merchan, because Cohen's been talking about this case as well in the media and on social media. So Cohen is seen as someone who's a wild card, and it could be easy for the prosecution to point at someone like Cohen and say, the defense to point at him and say he's not reliable. Additionally, Cohen is someone who already has a public persona. Look, during jury selection, one of the jurors that's currently on the jury now admitted to following Mychael Cohen on Twitter. So people might already have these preconceived notions of Mychael Cohen as they do about Donald Trump. So, this is going to be a difficult hurdle for the prosecution to really cross, because we know what the defense is going to do in painting him as unreliable.
So sticking with the hush money trial, but moving more into the political ramifications, there's a new report on thehill.com right now about some Republican senators seeing warning signs for Trump ahead of the November elections. A, with this ongoing testimony in Manhattan for the hush money trial, but B, because of the Indiana primary results last week, Nikki Haley bringing in a pretty sizable amount of the vote there among Republican voters, especially considering she dropped out so far long ago. Julia, tell us about this report and what some of these warning signs are.
Yeah, so I actually don't think the hush money case is going to play that big of a role in the election, because we've seen poll after poll that shows most Americans are concerned about kitchen table issues, the economy, crime, the situation at the southern border, abortion, healthcare. The list goes on, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or independent. This isn't registering. We rarely hear Democrats and President Biden attacking Trump on this, which I think is very telling. Now, if Trump is convicted, we'll see. There's been a mix of polling on that would suggest that maybe some voters sour on him. It doesn't, or some voters, it really doesn't make a difference for them. But I think the Indiana primary certainly does have more warning signs for Trump. I mean, we have to preface this that was an open primary. You could have Democrats and independents vote, but we saw that Nikki Haley, who dropped out of the race in March, we're now in May, she's still getting what, roughly 17% of the vote in that primary. So it really shows that there might be Democrats and independents, sure, who are, voting for her in these primaries, but also she's continuing to be somewhat of a force with Republican primary voters. So the big question is, what does Donald Trump do to appeal to those voters now? There's some Republicans, Haley-esque Republicans, who are, urging Trump to embrace those voters, to really, go after them. But then a lot of Trump's allies and other Republicans say, well, once Trump is officially the nominee after the election, it will be set in stone. It will be Biden versus Trump. And the majority of people, Republicans who might have supported Nikki Haley in the primary, they're not necessarily going to look at Biden and say, I'm going to vote for him. So there's some confidence on the part of Trump supporters and Republicans that these primaries that Haley is doing relatively well, and despite not being in the race, you have to asterisk them with the fact that they're open primaries and that they're not necessarily a clear reflection of the GOP primary electorate.
Still, though, a big block of voters right now, and especially with the polls showing that the states and nationally this race is so close, those voters can very easily make or break it. But look, Julia, the reason why we're talking so much about the hush money trial is because that's how former President Trump spends the most of his time these days. He has to be in court for 4 days a week. But over the weekend, he spent one of those precious days not in the Manhattan courtroom, holding a rally in New Jersey, a beachside rally in New Jersey. And it was during that event that he had some praise for a fictional character from Silence of the Lambs. Let's take a quick listen.
Has anyone ever seen The Silence of the Lambs? The late, great Hannibal Lecter. He's a wonderful man. The late, great Hannibal Lecter. We have people that are being released into our country that we don't want in our country, and they're coming in totally unchecked, totally unvetted, and we can't let this happen.
So that was a moment right there that's gotten a lot of buzz from the rally. But I want to take a step back, Julia. Trump is spending, again, one of his few days not in the courtroom, rallying voters in New Jersey. And he sounded bullish on his chances of winning the Garden State, saying, quote, we're going to win New Jersey. But you and I both know that historically, that's going to be an uphill climb. So why is Trump so bullish about this? And tell us why it's going to be difficult for a Republican to actually win that state.
Well, look, we know that New Jersey has had Republican governors in the past. Obviously, former Governor Chris Christie back in 2021. There was a gubernatorial race with incumbent Governor Phil Murphy. That might have been a bit too close for comfort for Republicans. But in, obviously some swing House districts that you've covered, Michael. But for the most part, that's very much a Democratic state. I'm curious as to whether there was a media strategy. Look, New Jersey's obviously a part of a very big, two big media markets, Philadelphia and the greater New York City media market. So, there could be some play in that. But what I really thought was interesting during this was that the former president was talking about the trial. And, when we say this trial isn't top of mind for voters, that's a two-way street. I mean, when we say that voters aren't paying attention to the trial, they're paying attention more to the economy, crime, healthcare, et cetera. Well, Donald Trump has to keep that in mind as well and not constantly vent about this if he really wants to connect with voters. This is something that was clearly red meat to his base. He's in a big populated area. He wants to get his message out. But, I think a lot of us after that rally and after a lot of what was said at the rally with the Hannibal Lecter stuff and all of that, I think a lot of us were left scratching our heads. But we'll see. There could be a method to this, all of this.
There could be. There could be. We'll have to wait and keep watching on that. Switching gears now, Julia, to the Israel-Hamas war. President Biden last week warned that if Israeli forces go forward with an invasion of Rafah, the U.S. will stop weapon shipments to Israel. Already, the U.S. has held back some shipments of large bombs to Israel. Now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken made the rounds on the Sunday shows yesterday, defending the administration's current posture on the war. Explain to us exactly what Blinken's argument was yesterday.
Well, look, essentially, Blinken is trying to walk a very fine line between, obviously supporting Israel and wanting to eradicate Hamas, in the Gaza Strip, but at the same time wanting to hold firm against Israel in terms of the civilian casualties that are in the tens of thousands at this point. 34,000, over that number have been killed, many of them women and children in Gaza. So we see that the Biden administration is walking this very fine line. And when you have this invasion of Rafah, this Israeli offensive in Rafah, that risk for starvation, for civilian casualties, et cetera, it only grows. So I think right now you just have the United States just walking this incredibly fine line with trying to, voice their support for Israel, a longtime ally, but at the same time, hold them accountable, while, quite frankly, a lot of public opinion for Biden, and I understand that this is a foreign policy story, but there are political implications for the president in this back home. So it's a difficult situation for him.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I want to zero in on those political ramifications right now. We know that the issue of the Israel-Hamas war has been a difficult one for President Biden to navigate. There have been progressives, lawmakers, voters who have been urging him to change his policy on the war, raising concerns about the mounting humanitarian deaths in Gaza. We saw that protest vote in the Michigan Democratic primary. But talk about how this may play out on the campaign trail right now, because while Biden may be appeasing those progressive voices, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for example, praised this move. He's also getting accusations, particularly from Republicans, that he's abandoning Israel in their time of need. So talk about what the strategy is here and how you think it'll play out on the campaign trail.
Yeah, I mean, look, the strategy is, essentially what I said before, him trying to placate, the progressive base of his party, younger voters, Arab American voters who aren't happy with how Israel has conducted this war and how Israel, the U.S. has supported Israel. I think it's certainly, you heard that praise from progressives, but Republicans very much, and I'm sure, this is very predictable, they're attacking President Biden on this, and some Democrats have as well for not standing as firmly with Israel. So, in terms of the Republican criticism, that's one thing. But I think Joe Biden right now in this strategy is much more focused sort of on the rift within his own party on this.
Yeah, for sure. Julia, let's hit the campaign trail quickly. There is a big Democratic primary tomorrow in Maryland for the next person who's going to represent the old line state in the Senate. We have Angela Brooks, David Trone. Give us the state of that race heading into tomorrow's primary.
Yeah, look, David Trone for a while was the clear front runner. He has the most money. He's, sitting member of Congress, a somewhat national name, a big name in Maryland. But we've seen also Brooks very much, even though she doesn't have as much money, she's been able to close that gap. And in some polls, including the latest Emerson College, The Hill, DC News Now poll, she's leading him within the margin of error. Now, this primary is very important because whoever wins this will go up against former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. And Larry Hogan, even though I would say Maryland is a blue state, Larry Hogan is a pretty strong candidate. And you have David Trone making the case that he is better equipped than Angela Brooks to take on Larry Hogan. But Brooks has certainly, very much put up a big fight against Trone, despite having less money, less resources than him. So it'll be a very closely watched primary we're watching tomorrow.
Yeah, and Julia, you kind of stole my last question from me right there, but this has been such a bitter Democratic primary, but whoever comes out victorious tomorrow, that's not even going to be the start of this competitive campaign, because then whoever wins is going to have to take on Larry Hogan, who is one of Mitch McConnell's top recruits. Republicans rejoiced when he finally decided to jump into the race. So just quickly touch on that. Whoever wins this primary, how difficult is that race going to be against somebody like Larry Hogan, who was a very popular governor of the state?
Look, I think it's going to be difficult for the winner of this primary, but also Larry Hogan. Look, Maryland is a blue state, and even though Larry Hogan has proven himself to be, one of the most vocal Trump critics, you already see ads with Democrats tying him to Trump and tying him to, national Republican abortion bans, for example, or abortion bans that Republicans have gotten behind in other states. So that's Larry Hogan's going to have his own challenges. I think at first this was seen, similar to how Florida is being seen. Democrats are sort of making a play in Florida. That's an uphill climb. Similar situation happening in Maryland. But like you said, Larry Hogan, very popular former governor. It's going to be tough.
Absolutely. That is, an understatement right there. Julia Manchester, national politics reporter with The Hill. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Michael.